goes up.
In North London, the family of a convicted and executed murderer tend his grave. Early this year, the body of James Hanratty was brought from Bedford jail and reburied here in consecrated ground. The family, perhaps inevitably, believe he was innocent of the A6 murder. But there are others outside the Hanratty family who also believe that his guilt was not proved beyond reasonable doubt. Is there a case for an inquiry?
The A6 murder on the night of Tuesday, the 22nd of August, 1961, was one of the most appalling and mysterious of the century. The murdered man was Michael Gregson. With him that night was Valerie Story, who was shot and raped by the murderer. It was the longest criminal trial in British history. The jury spent an unprecedented length of time considering their verdict. They found Hanratty guilty. But since then, books and articles have been written attempting to show that Hanratty was innocent, or at least should not have been convicted on the evidence. 45 MPs have now asked for an inquiry into the A6 murder. I asked Valerie Story, who survived that night but who's now paralyzed, what her view was of arguments which tried to demonstrate Hanratty's innocence.
Well, I would like to know exactly why these people have taken it upon themselves to try and whitewash Hanratty. And after all, they weren't actually there. I should know if Hanratty was guilty or not. I was there. These other people weren't.
It must have been very difficult for you to look at the whole trial dispassionately. I mean, were you convinced in your own mind, beyond all reasonable doubt, that the jury were right to convict him?
Beyond any doubt whatsoever, Hanratty was guilty. I know, I was there.
The old station inn, Taplow. On the evening of the 22nd of August, 1961, Michael Gregson and Valerie Story came here for a drink, as they often did. From here they drove, still in daylight, to Dorney Reach, to this cornfield. It was a relatively remote and private place. They had been there before. At 9:30, as night was falling, the murderer, masked, carrying a revolver, knocked on the window of the car and moved into the back seat. For 2 hours, he forced them at gunpoint to stay in the field. Then, suddenly, without explanation, he made Michael Gregson drive back onto the road, and they began that 3-hour journey into the night, which gives the crime its macabre and horrifying character. Miss Story remembers.
Well, I was certainly very scared. We tried to keep Hanratty talking all the time. I've never talked quite so much in all my life before. We talked nearly the whole time, trying to find out who he was, what he was doing, why he was there. We just attempted to keep him talking, and it went on for so long that it just became unreal. We didn't know what was going to happen, how it was going to end.
It ended at 2 o'clock at Dead Man's Hill. The gunman killed Gregson, shot Valerie Story 5 times, left her for dead.
As I approached, I could see there were 2 things lying on the ground. As I got closer, I could see they were in fact people. As I came up, the girl was closer to me. She was on her back with her skirt up to her waist. I could see now that she was seriously wounded. Behind her there was the body of a man lying stretched out, his face slightly covered, fairly obviously dead. I realized that she obviously must know a lot about what had happened, and I thought I'd better get some information down as quickly as possible. Fortunately, I had a board in my hand with which I was making the traffic sensors. So I turned over one of the pages and made notes on the back. I asked her what her name was. She said it was Valerie Story, and she lived at 15 Anthony Way, Slough. She said, "Please tell my parents, they'll be so worried about me." So I said, "Well, what has happened?" She said, "At about 9:30, we picked up a man near Slough. He had a gun. He said it was a .38. He forced us to drive here, and then he shot us."
The murderer, leaving the bodies at 3 a.m., drove the car south to Ilford on the outskirts of London, where his belligerent driving attracted notice. As in our reconstruction, the car turned into this side street. There the police found it and began the search for the man responsible for this apparently motiveless torment and savagery.
Look now at a timetable of the principal events before the trial. 24th of August, murder weapon found under back seat of London bus. According to one witness, Hanratty used to hide things here. 24th of August, police circulate description of wanted man. 30 years old, 5 foot 6 inches tall, medium built, deep-set brown eyes. 28th of August, police interview their first suspect, Peter Louis Alphon. 29th of August, identikits published based on descriptions supplied by Valerie Story and another witness who saw murder car and driver. 11th September, Vienna Hotel. Cartridge cases fitting the murder bullets found in room 24, Hanratty's room. Alphon also stayed in this hotel. 22nd September, Superintendent Acott appeals on television for Alphon to come forward. Later, Alphon gave himself up. 24th of September, identity parade held at Valerie Story's bedside in Guy's Hospital. Alphon at parade. Valerie Story picked someone else. Hanratty not present. 6th of October, James Hanratty, now wanted by police, telephones Acott, assuring him he has nothing to do with the A6 business. 12th of October, Hanratty arrested. 14th of October, second identity parade at Stoke Mandeville. Valerie Story asks everyone to say, "Be quiet, I'm thinking," a phrase the murderer had repeated in a Cockney accent, "I'm thinking." She identifies Hanratty. 22nd of January 1962, the trial of James Hanratty for the A6 murder begins.
When the trial opened at Bedford Assizes, public interest was enormous. A remarkable number of witnesses contradicted each other, especially on the question of identification. In this protracted confusion, Valerie Story, brought from hospital to testify, confronted and identified Hanratty. Yet in the first identification parade, when Hanratty was not present, Miss Story had picked out someone else. She was asked why and what that other man had looked like.
I suppose I picked out someone who I thought resembled Hanratty. Hanratty wasn't on that parade. I couldn't identify him. I just tried to pick out somebody, I suppose, who I thought looked like him. I made a mistake. The man had nothing to do with the case. It's just one of those things.
At the second identification parade at Stoke Mandeville, you picked out James Hanratty after everyone on the parade had been asked to speak. Was he the only Cockney on the parade?
I don't think so. I can't really remember. But I certainly knew his voice when I heard it. Yes, there was no doubt about that.
It said you took a long time to pick him out. Is that true?
It takes a long time to wheel a hospital bed up a line of 12 men and back again, and for the 12 men to repeat the sentence, which was, "Be quiet, will you, I'm thinking." And then the bed was wheeled up and down the line again. I believe it took about 20 minutes, I don't know. I was not conscious of the time at all. But these things can't be done in a few moments.
There's no doubt in your mind?
Absolutely none whatsoever. None at all.
Hanratty was remarkably confident until the 12th day, when he startled everyone by producing a new alibi. It was not believed. Mr. Justice Gorman summed up at length. The jury retired. The feeling among observers then was that they would find guilty. But when they came back after being out 6 hours and asked the judge about reasonable doubt, few people in court thought Hanratty would then be convicted. But when they came back again, nearly 10 hours after they'd first gone out, they said guilty, and James Hanratty was condemned to death. At Bedford Jail, the appeal dismissed, James Hanratty was hanged on the 4th of April, 1962. The last relative to see him alive was his father.
He said, "Dad, there's only one thing I want you to do, is to clear my name. Tomorrow morning I'll take this like a man. They've pinned this on to me. I want you, Mam, Michael, Richard, and Peter. Never let anybody say a wrong word about me. I want you to clear my name." and that was it. He turned on his heel and walked away.
Do you think that if he had committed a murder, he would have told you?
Definitely. He'd have said to me, Dad, well, I've done it, and I deserve whatever I get, and so forth. He would not have put this on his family to clear his name. He told me himself that he was innocent, and I am convinced he was innocent.
What troubled observers of the A6 trial were the unresolved questions. What was the motive for the crime? Thus, the motive the prosecution alleged is unconvincing. Why did the murderer go to that remote field? Why particularly should Hanratty, a small-time urban thief, be there? These questions were not convincingly answered at the trial. Again, there was the suicide of Dixie Charles France, a friend of Hanratty's who was a key prosecution witness. He killed himself after Hanratty's appeal failed. At the trial, even the evidence of identification, apart from Valerie's stories, was bewildering. To take just one example, there were two men, two friends in Ilford, Mr. Trower and Mr. Hogan, both claiming to have been in the same place at the same time when they saw the murder car.
Well, on that morning, I've come down here to pick up Paddy Hogan, used to live here, and of course, while I'm waiting for Paddy to come down, I walked back towards the car. At that moment, 1956 Morris come thundering up the street here and shot round the corner into Avondale Crescent. You see, well, I didn't think much of it, really, and well, as I was going to work, I mentioned it to Paddy, and he said something about it, bit of a dodgy road round here. I said, well, they all drive like that, it must be. You see, so never thought no more of it. Well, I went. Then when we get to the top there, he turned me round, we come back, and of course all the coppers were round there then, and he said about I'd seen a bloke come up the road here and turn round the corner, and they asked me all about it. Well, he said, how long did you see the bloke? What's it all about? 3 seconds roughly, you know. And then little time passed and I had to go down and identify a person who I picked out as James Hanratty.
Mr. Hogan gave me a different account that morning.
Yeah, well, on the morning of the 23rd, I was standing at the street door waiting for my friend to go to work around about 6:45, and I was reading the morning paper, and there was a car past me. I glanced up at the car. It was a Morris Minor, a Morris 1000. Colour was grey. I happened to glance up at it as it went past, and I went into Avondale Crescent. And
just around the corner?
Just around the corner from where I live, yes. And I didn't take much more notice of it than that.
Did you get a look at the man who was driving it?
Yes, yes.
Did he look like James Hanratty?
No, he wasn't James Hanratty at all. I noted I'd seen the bloke distinctively, and he wasn't James Hanratty. That much I can vouch for. And the chap I seen was, as far as I can recollect, was dark-haired, clean-shaven. Wouldn't like to estimate his age, but as far back as I can remember, that was the description of the bloke. I wouldn't like to say whether he had glasses on or not, but it wasn't Hanratty. That much I can definitely vouch for.
We put it to Mr. Trower, a prosecution witness, that Mr. Hogan said he, Mr. Trower, was not there when the car passed.
Well, now, Mr. Hogan has got 2 mornings mixed up, because the morning before he was waiting in the street. That particular morning, I had to knock for him. You see? That's where I think he got... I mean, everybody gets mixed up, we know that. But he's got more or less, you might as well say, the excitement. He's got 2 mornings rolled into one.
But in your mind, there's no doubt that it was that morning...
Well, in my mind, I picked out the person who I see.
And when you saw him in court, did you recognise him again?
Well, when they asked me in court, I just pointed to the accused and that was it.
Mr. Trower says that you probably got the day confused, that you mixed it up with some other morning.
Well, I don't go on dates a lot. I never have done. I go from day to day as regards to working conditions. But on this particular morning, I don't remember the exact date. I do remember I was waiting at the door to go to work. And according to the evidence Mr. Trower gave, that he was waiting for me outside the door. Well, I was waiting at the door at 6:45, and Mr. Trower hadn't been next to near my place till at least 10 or 7:15 on that particular morning.
You're sure it was that morning?
I'm definitely sure it was that morning. No doubt about that.
The strange, mystifying reports which fed doubt did not end at the trial. The Daily Sketch reported a very curious incident at Swiss Cottage concerning Michael Gregson's widow. A week after the murder, Hanratty stayed near here before cheerfully going off to Ireland with his girlfriend. A report of the odd story of the shop at Swiss Cottage comes from Peter Duffy, now of the Daily Mail.
During the A6 murder trial, Bill Ure, who is Mrs. Gregston's brother-in-law, told me that 8 days after the murder, he was in his shop with Mrs. Gregston. She was helping him to try and take a mind off the events of the murder. And she looked through the window into this arcade and saw a man. And immediately she said, that is the man who killed my husband. And she told Bill Ure that she had an overpowering feeling that that was the man. Bill Ure thought little of it at the time, but the following day, this was September the 1st, he went into a cafe just up the road here, across the junction, having a cup of tea, when he saw the man again. He recognized the man as the man that Mrs. Gregson had pointed out, and he followed him from the cafe, tried to follow him across Finchley Road, but failed because of the traffic. And when the traffic cleared, he went across the road and saw him go into a shop in Northways Parade, which is the other side of Swiss Cottage. He thought that he'd gone into a photographer's shop. He ran in there, there was no man in the shop, and he telephoned the police. He rang Scotland Yard and said he was Mrs. Gregston's brother-in-law, and he'd seen a man who Mrs. Gregston thought was the killer. Later in the investigations, the police went back to the shops and they questioned everybody in the block. And they went into the florists, and they found that on that day, the day that Bill Ure saw this man in the cafe, a man came into the florist shop and gave his name as Ryan, Jimmy Ryan, which was Hanratty's alias. And he sent a dozen red roses to Mrs. Hanratty at her home address in Sycamore Drive, Kingsbury, and wrote out a card saying, don't worry, everything's all right.
Doesn't seem to be an extraordinary coincidence that Mrs. Gregson, having only the identikit to go on, which doesn't really look very much like James Hanratty,
Nothing like
should look out and discover a man who was eventually convicted for the murder.
It's something that is completely inexplicable. It's a tremendous coincidence, and I've tried to explain it, but I'm at a loss to explain how she was able to say that was the man who killed my husband.
A more mysterious and perturbing source of doubt in the minds of writers and MPs about the A6 murder are subsequent events like the so-called confession by a man who recurs in this case again and again, both before and after the trial, Peter Louis Alphon. I'd heard that he'd been to see James Hanratty's father.
12 months later, on the anniversary, which we always have had the service for Jimmy since he was executed, I received a phone call, and it was from Alphon.
It's Peter
Louis Alphon. In any case, later, at a later date, he come to my house. Well, in the meantime, I received a confession that Alphon had already made. And I had a photostatic of the confession. So, when I had in my pocket when he come in, I asked him, when he come to my house, I asked him if he had wrote this confession. Oh, he said, not that one. Putting his hand in his inside pockets and taking out, this is the original one. My son Peter was sitting down with me and his mother, and Alphon, Peter says to Alphon, if the neighbors around here knew that you was in this house and you wrote that confession, you'd never get out of here alive. I turned around and I says to Alphon, the best thing you can do is get out of this house, because at that time I was beginning to see red myself. He turned around and he says to me, let me compensate you for what has happened to your son. Superintendent Aker in the establishment has murdered your son. And that is it.
This book about the case, published in France, not available here, attracts attention among journalists and MPs. It accuses Peter Alphonse of the murder. Its author is John Justice. Justice became an intimate of Alphonse after the trial. He was given the so-called confession notes in a London hotel.
And it was only when I got back home and started reading them that they appalled me. They were quite sinister. Said I knew I must rape her, I must kill her, but first I might as well rape her. And she was crying and sobbing, and had there been other sort of people, I wouldn't have killed them. When I approached them on their illicit love, Gregston said, this has nothing to do with you. So I immediately saw that he was talking about himself. So I handed the notes to the Home Office and to Philip Brockway.
I killed Hanratty, well, all right. In the olden days, people killed one another and nothing was said about it.
But as well as the alleged written confession, John Justice also tape-recorded telephone conversations, he claims, with Peter Louis Alphonse.
What have they done to me since? They've always acted like they knew that I'd done it.
The tapes go on for hours. They vary in audibility, tone and content. Listening to them heightens the bizarre atmosphere that surrounds the A6 case. Are they the confessions to the murder of Michael Gregston or not? Mr. Justice talks about how the calls were made.
Oh, there were. Sometimes they'd go on dozens a night, ring, 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 click, down, you know, nuisance calls. But I could usually get him to speak in the end.
It's Peter Alphonse's voice, then, that's on these tapes?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Hello? Oh, Mr. Enders calling from the London call box. Will you pay for the call? No. 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 Right, thank you. Hello? Hello? Justice? Yes? So you wouldn't accept the call, eh? I didn't accept it. That's rather unfortunate for you because there's going to be a lot of trouble now from now on. I mean, I killed Gregston and the establishment ain't getting ready. Well, it's the establishment's fault. What have they done to me since? Yes. They've always acted like they knew that I'd done it.
At one point, the voice on the tapes suggests that there was a motive for the murder.
And I was there to separate a couple of people. If you understand, in the car, I gave them 5 hours to do it. If you put a strong man in, somebody who's willing to go in with a gun and see that justice is done, then that's what he's done. And I've gone in, and I've given them every chance. They've become 5 hours. That's the motive. That is the motive, I'm telling you. And that's why it took 5 hours. Do you understand? And you've got your motive.
And there's this important passage.
I know the strength of it. More than one murder in the world, you know. When I do a murder, it's not murder at all. It's an act of God.
Hello. Hi. I'm sorry you missed your train.
Peter Louis Alphonse came to meet us on the 29th of October. He did not know we had the tapes. He had never heard them before.
Yes, I'm sorry about it.
He told me that in his view, Hanratty was guilty. So I asked him about the confession which he was alleged to have given to John Justice.
Well, these notes were a part of details for a book that Justice had suggested we collaborate on. It was to be a fictional reconstruction of the crime, and Justice put it to me that we ought to stress the psychological interest of the crime. What happened in the car for 5 hours, nobody knows, of course. What established story, but obviously, why should she go into details after what she's been through? And I used my imagination, and I used the first person as the most economical, grammatical form, the point which Justice, who is not a very well-educated man, doesn't seem to understand. I'm writing to the Home Office in the next day or two, and they've just had my explanation. I saw a senior police officer a couple of days ago, and he said, this is the first time we've had your explanation of it, and we don't like what's... No, it looks bad to us now. I put it to them that they should have come to me a long, long time ago for it. And I'm now writing to the Home Secretary, asking for compensation for the persecution which has gone on as a result of this man's activities, and I'm also asking him to charge him with criminal conspiracy.
The Hanratty family have stated that you went to them after the execution of their son and offered them money as compensation.
They've stated quite a lot of untrue things, and I'm afraid that I can't go along with that.
You don't accept that?
Deny it. I'm afraid I haven't got money to spare to offer to anyone anyway.
Mr. Alphon, you say that those notes towards a confession were intended as fiction, as something for a book. I'd like you to listen to this for a moment.
This is the one time when I'm very irritated to ring that I can't help noting. Well,
That's your voice.
Quite simply, for your tapes, I can't really care. I've done the murder, but I'm afraid the police don't know that I've done it.
I must say, I can't hear very well. The diction doesn't seem...
Stop a moment. I'll play it again. There's perhaps some bit is more clear to you. But I mean,
well,
it sounds...
No, you're going to do it.
And I was there to separate a couple of people. So I understand in the car, I gave them 5 hours to do it. If you put a strong man in, somebody who's willing to go in with a gun and see that justice is done...
That's all right. This is an academic argument I'm having with Justice. That's what he's putting to me. I'm speaking to him in inverted commas.
You don't mean what you say on that tape?
I do mean what I say on the tape. I'm speaking to him in inverted commas. He's putting it to me, and I'm putting it back at him. Look, Justice, I'm the man, I don't know what was said. There's something about being in the car. I'm putting it back to him. Do you understand? I'm speaking back to him in inverted commas.
You say on the tapes, I killed Gregston, the establishment killed Hanratty. Was that taking...
Justice put it to me. He said that I killed Hanratty. I said, after what he previously said, I killed Hanratty. I beg your pardon, to start again. I killed Gregston, and so you say I killed Hanratty. Well, that can't be true. Even if I did kill Gregston, I didn't kill Hanratty, did I? I mean, the establishment did that. They hanged him. I don't go for hanging people. That's what I'm saying to him in the context of his argument. You see?
Well, what about remarks like...
The police understand it anyway, whether you do or not.
You also say that the man who's represented by yourself, by your voice on this tape, that...
Well, that is me, that's me.
That's you, yes, it is you on the tape. Fine, the people, they knew I wouldn't go to the police. I mean, in your reading of the murder then, who are they? You are saying that someone sent the murderer to the field to meet Michael Gregston and Barry Story.
Well, that's what Justice is saying to me, and I'm putting it back to him. He's saying, this is the theory that we've concocted jointly together. I think obviously somebody put the gun in his hand. I mean, he didn't make the gun himself, did he?
Why exactly did you suggest on the tapes that the purpose of the murder was to separate Michael Gregston and Valerie Story?
He did try to separate them. He sent Gregston away originally to get some cigarettes, didn't he? And Gregston came back. I suggest that I think he was a very brave man to have done so, but I think that perhaps if he hadn't have come back, things would have turned out very differently. He'd still be alive, and I think probably Valerie's Story wouldn't have been in the predicament she is today. I mean, she's rallied gamely from it, and I'm very pleased to have seen that. But I think that they conducted their business wrongly with the murderer. They didn't treat him the right way, psychologically. In other words, let me put it to you point blank, I think they should have pandered to him. I think they tried to be a little bit cocky, and it got on his nerves.
These tapes, Mr. Alphon, the tone of voice on them, your voice, is excitable, almost hysterical. Now, is that the tone in which people talk about a work of fiction?
I don't think we were discussing the work of fiction explicitly by that time. I mean, Justice made his motives well known to me. I was understandably wild, but I wouldn't say that you say they're hysterical. I think it's a perfectly controlled hysteria. It's no good talking like a lamb to a man like that. You've got to, as I say, I told you before, intimidation. I don't mind admitting it. Why not?
On the tapes you say, when I do a murder, it's not a murder, it's an act of God. I mean, do you yourself, were you imagining that, or do you yourself have a sort of messianic mission?
Oh, dear man, I'm not going to do any murder. I think it's blasphemy. Absolutely. I mean, if I did a murder, I think it would be an act of God, because I certainly wouldn't do one. I know any circumstances. Well, I don't know. I think if I was paid by the state, of course, then I would do. I'm not a pacifist or anything like that, but not private murder. Certainly not.
It often happens that after a sensational murder, people confess. Sometimes they couldn't have done it. But perhaps the fundamental doubt about the Hanratty verdict comes from the evidence. Did the longest murder trial lead to the truth? Now, the purpose of the British trial system, most authorities agree, is not to find out everything about the crime and the criminal, but to settle, on the evidence available, a contest between guilty and not guilty, black and white. In the A6 case, from the enormous volume of evidence, 21 days and 620,000 words of it, we decided to look at that last hope alibi of James Hanratty's. By producing it at the 11th hour, he threw the court into confusion. The alibi was received with that skepticism that customarily meets miracles. No one believed him. Hanratty's story was that on the evening of the crime, Tuesday, 22nd of August, he had travelled from Liverpool to Rhyl in North Wales.
He'd gone there by coach from Liverpool, he said, to sell stolen goods. Near the railway station, a few doors from a betting shop, he said, there was a boarding house where he'd found a room. In the boarding house hallway, he said, there was a bowl of flowers and a mirror on the hall stand. There are. He could, he claimed, hear the trains from here. You can. In the attic, Hanratty said, there was a green bath. There is. The landlady gave evidence for him.
Do you remember James Hanratty coming here?
Yes.
What day do you think it was?
On a Tuesday.
Why do you think it was a Tuesday?
Well, we had one gentleman staying here. He came in on a Sunday, and he left on the Tuesday morning. So the room was empty. The room number 4 was empty. There was no one there. So, of course, this gentleman came to the door about 7 o'clock at night, between 7 and half past. And he says, could you take me in for bed and breakfast? So I said, how long did you want to stay? Well, just 2 nights, that's all. And, of course, I considered a while. I thought perhaps 2 nights wasn't much. Then I felt sorry for the fellow because he looked very lonely. He wanted somewhere to stay. So I thought, oh, all right, I'll take you in. And so I said, are you working down here? No, I'm not working down here. I've just come down here to see a friend of mine.
That was Tuesday, the 22nd.
Tuesday, the 22nd.
Why was it you didn't say this in court in the trial?
I couldn't very well say it.
Why not?
Because I was asked questions, and I was there just to say yes or no. And that's all.
But if you had a chance, you would have said it?
Yes.
And you're sure it must have been that week? It couldn't have been the week before or the week after?
No, I don't think so.
Do you think the trial was fair to you? Do you have a chance to say all you wanted to say? How did you feel about that?
Well, I was really mad about it, because I was going to say a few things there. Then I was told by someone there that I was just to say yes or no to the questions. I felt as if I'd killed someone, and I was just an ordinary witness, that's all.
Hanratty claimed that he had gone to the fairground at Rill to try to find a friend, Terry Evans, with whom he'd stayed a month earlier. In the trial, one of the key points was that James Hanratty said he was coming to Rill on that Tuesday in order to dispose of goods which he'd stolen, of jewellery particularly. Now, in the course of the trial, when you were cross-examined by the prosecution counsel asked you, had Hanratty any reason at all to think you, Mr. Evans, would be the sort of person who would be interested in disposing of stolen property? And you said, no, I should not think so. Did you mean that?
Well, no, all they allow you to say in these courts is yes or no. What I wanted to say was that the evening he stayed in my house, I was talking with about myself, Hanratty and 3 other chaps about everyday affairs and what we do and what we don't do. And I did tell him, because I did know a chap, I told him at the time that I knew a fella who would buy stolen property. I wouldn't, so in the court I couldn't say what I wanted to say. I had to say yes or no. Well, I had to say no because I wouldn't buy stolen property myself. But I did know a chap who would buy it.
So if the counsel in court had asked you, had Hanratty any reason to think you'd be a chap who could help him find somebody to sell stolen goods, you'd have said yes?
Yes, definitely, yeah. Without a doubt.
And you never had a chance in court to say
no,
this?
No, all he'd done, yes or no, that's all they allow you to say.
So Hanratty was speaking the truth when he
said
was
He was speaking the truth, definitely, yeah. Because I'd already told the fella. And if they'd have let me say my mind, maybe he wouldn't be where he is today. It'd have helped anyway.
But when he did come here to Rill, and he was looking for you...
Yeah.
Did you ever hear he was looking for you?
After I'd give evidence, and his photo appeared in the paper, there was a paper seller on the prom, called me over and told me that he remembered roughly the exact date now, I don't know, but he remembered the chap coming to him and asking him, this Hanratty, because he'd seen Hanratty's photo in the paper that day, did he know where he could find Terry? And so the fella said, Terry who? And at that, Hanratty said, oh, I'll go to the fair and look for him.
We searched Rill for the paper seller and found him. Mr. Jones, known locally as White, is a new witness who did not appear at the trial. Mr. White, I'm told that you met this man in Rill. Is that true?
Yes.
Can you tell me what happened?
Well, the night as he come off the bus, he just asked me, he says, comes up the road here from the bus station, and he said to me, he says, where is Terry? And I told him straight I didn't know who Terry was at the time, which I didn't. Because so many Terrys I knew. So he says, which way do you go to the fairground? So I pointed down the road, and he went down the road that way. I said, okay. And then he come back up, he says, any idea where I can get digs? He says, oh, I said, yes, sir. Go to number 19, Kimmel Street. I said, Mrs. Jones will put you up. That's all I've seen of him after that. He went, and I never seen him after.
When do you think that was?
It was on the... I do think it was about... close about soon after 7 o'clock to 8 o'clock.
And what day of the week do you think?
About on a Tuesday night.
What makes you think it was a Tuesday night?
Well, the simple reason why, because the Rill Journal was out the next day.
The which?
The Rill Journal and Advertiser was out the next day.
Well, on the Wednesday?
On the Wednesday.
Well, then you sell the Rill Advertiser?
And the person just only been to me and asked if I got it, and I hadn't got it. The other person, I don't know.
And you're clear in your mind that this was the man?
Yes, it is the man. It is him who come to me that day.
That Tuesday night?
That's the simple reason why I noticed his shoes were very bad. And his shoes were very fluffed at the time. And I thought perhaps the poor devil had been walking. Which, of course, I didn't take much notice of that day. I'm very fond of helping people in that way, and I like to put my heart and soul to help people.
Mr. White, have you ever given this information to anyone else?
No. Only to Terry.
That's Terry Evans?
Terry Evans, when he showed me the photo of the lad, and I told him that's the same lad. He says, we'll come down looking for you the same day, I says. I can always remember that.
When was it you were shown this picture in the paper?
After Terry come back after trial. After trial.
I see, you never saw the picture of James Hanratty until he was convicted?
No, never was. He was convicted after. After seeing the photo, I told Terry who he was.
Well, did you think of going to the police, or the defence with this information?
Well, the question is, the court has already finished then, which I knew nothing about until that time, till after Terry come that day.
Well, because the trial was over, you think...
The trial was over.
You thought it wasn't worthwhile?
Well, I know. I put in my mind I didn't know who the person was, because I was never seen any pictures of him. I had seen the pictures before, I would have known.
Do you wish now that you had gone at the time?
I wish I had gone. I was very sorry in my heart. I didn't go, which I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know them. To be honest, I didn't know who the person was. But had I seen a photo, I would have known. Definitely. I'd known the person, but knowing him so well. I've known him from his picture. I've seen his picture.
So you are convinced, are you, that he was here as he claimed he was on
Yes,
Tuesday night?
I'm more convinced than anything, because that was the person I sent to Mrs. Jones's to get digs.
If those people in Rill were speaking the truth, then James Hanratty could not have committed the A6 murder. Of course, in talking to me, they were not in a court of law. Yet I wonder if that evidence had been presented in court, whether the jury, which took so long over its verdict, would have found James Hanratty guilty beyond all reasonable doubt. Certainly those who believe in Hanratty's innocence will find it strengthens their case for an inquiry. But any inquiry into the A6 murder will have to meet the unshakable certainty of Miss Valerie's story.
Of course Hanratty's the man. I was there, I saw him. There's no possible doubt whatsoever that Hanratty was guilty.
Do you have any idea of what you think his motive might have been to be in that rather remote field at that time?
None at all. I don't know what he was doing there, whether he was housebreaking or what, I just don't know. I don't know why he should be there at that particular time.
What is your view of the notion of having an inquiry into the whole case?
Well, I am convinced that Hanratty was guilty. He was tried by the law of the land. The jury found him guilty. He was sentenced. I don't think that we can all be wrong. I mean, Hanratty is guilty. There's just no question of doubt at all. These people who think they know better, I mean, they weren't on Deadman's Hill that night in August. They weren't there. They don't really know anything about it.
The Home Secretary is considering whether there should be an inquiry or not. It's for Roy Jenkins to decide whether the doubts are now serious enough for the state to look again at the A6 murder, at the case against James Hanratty. That's all from Panorama tonight. Until next Monday night, good night.